the starting point is this one. I mean, the most important slide you'll see today is this one, I think. Maybe from Orange you'll see other interesting, but from my presentation, that is the most important one. I guess you know all about the so-called SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals? No? Okay, so if you don't, the World Agenda from the United Nations is that we should be achieving by 2030, and most likely that's not going to be the case, 17 goals, okay, that are for the whole planet. And essentially the idea is that you have a safe society, you have a good economy, and you can develop all of that. Now, that presentation of the goals is a bit specific, because what he says is that if you want to develop as a company, you need to have a society. So just look at the companies within the developing countries. They are doing much better than the companies in the developed countries. Why? Because the countries are developing, okay? So that's good for the economy. But most of the time, if you just think about that, the main thing that you're missing is that if you don't have a biosphere, you don't have a society, okay? So regardless of technology and cell phones and whatever, you need to have food, you need to breathe, you need to have water. Those are the basic needs. And that's what I'm going to tell you about, okay? Because those are the issues we're facing at the moment. We don't quite know how we can do that for 8 billion people, which is the number we are at the moment. So my topic is the biosphere, okay? And how you address this situation. What is the situation regarding the biosphere? That's this one. So that comes from a paper that was published, I think it was last week. And that is a last update of a very important framework called planetary boundaries. It comes from a research center in Stockholm, which is right now the main provider of this kind of information. And what they do is, you see at the center, the green part is what is a safe Earth. So that's where we should all be in order to have a safe environment for 8 billion people. And if you go beyond that, what you're doing is you're breaking the planetary boundary. So we're going to focus today on one planetary boundary, because most of this course is about this one, and that's climate change. But you need to keep in mind that some of the issues you're going to face is loss of biodiversity, the development of so-called novel entities. What are novel entities? They are chemical products. That's essentially that. There is an issue now with fresh water. So we are about to miss water. We won't have enough water in some places in the world. Both for humans and for vegetation. So there are multiple issues that we need to address, okay? And here, I'm not talking about society. I'm just talking about the environment, because that's the basis of everything. If you look at climate change, well, I guess you know about that. It's not about, it is about the summer we had, okay? But it's not just about the summer. It's actually a trend. So ever since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, you have an increase in temperature. Might be changing a little bit, but you do have an increase in temperature. And it is increasing more and more. So we still expect, some of us expect that we might stay within the so-called Paris Agreement. That means that the increase in temperature compared to the pre-industrial temperature should be maintained to a maximum of 2 degrees. Actually, it used to be between 1.5 and 2 degrees, but honestly, we know that we won't make it to 1.5. We will break this limit. Right now, we are around 1.2 already, and the heat increase is speeding up all the time. That is the summer we had. So I just took those pictures from the summer, okay? And it's like that everywhere in the world. So you have issues in China, you have issues in India, You have issues in North America, in South America, in Europe as well. There are issues everywhere. You might argue that just a weather report problem. Okay, you can say that. You can say, well, that that was a summer. There been catastrophe during the summer, but that's gone. But that's not the case, because year after year after year, it's more and more the case. And we can anticipate that, because actually when you look at the report, this has been anticipated. That what happened around the Mediterranean Sea. You need to think about what that means. Maybe some of you experiment that before, but what that means to live when you have 50 degrees, okay? 50 degrees Celsius, you just can't. So the only thing you can really is hide in your place and turn on the climb. And the more you do this sort of things, the worse the situation will be. So really, it is increasingly difficult. And that's what you have. So that's a paper from the journal Nature that was published, I think, 3 weeks ago. What you see is, so at the bottom, what you have is a temperature in 1850, okay, beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And then it goes up, it goes up, it goes up, it goes up. And it goes up more and more. So between 2020 and 23, the temperature increase on the planet has been the same that between 2000 and 2020. So we did, within 3 years, what we used to do during 20 years. That's where we are at the moment. And we can know about that. So so I don't know whether you know the IPCC. That is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. What those guys do, they don't do research. They do what we call meta-analysis. They take all the research from the world and they look at the consensus. So if you look at what they're doing, it is a consensus on the situation. And the first things they found is we are responsible of the situation. We are human beings. And we can anticipate what will happen. And anticipation is not that good. So just to get a sense of where you are at the moment regarding those issues, could you tell me, do you have any knowledge of what is the average scenario for the IPCC? Just raise your hand, that the old way. Who would think that before the end of the century, the temperature increase on the planet overall will be 1.6? Who would say it's 2.7? Okay. 3.8 and 4.4. Wow, okay, well, that's interesting. So hopefully I would say that's 2.7, but you need to think about that as land and water as well, okay? So that is for the ocean and the land. That is on average. What does it mean for, let's say, Europe? If you take the same model and you run the model for Western Europe, what you find out is 3.8. So by the end of the century, the temperature increase will be 3.8. During the summer, the temperature increase will be 5 degrees. So you just keep in mind that this is the average scenario. That's a scenario if we don't fumble too much, okay? And that we're not sure to achieve that. And even if we achieve that, this is going to be tough. This is going to be tough for you as individuals, of course, but this is going to be tough for you as managers of companies as well. Because that's what's going to happen. So that is a difference between Europe 20,000 years ago and today. And that's a huge change, okay? But I mean, over 20 years, 20,000 years, you can adapt, you can adjust. I mean, human beings did adjust to that. Now, the problem we're facing is that it might be the same. We might have a 5-degree increase before the end of the century. So that mean, what does that mean? That means that as human beings, we are not going to adjust. We won't have time. But what we need to adjust are societies. Essentially, we need to adjust the societies. The reason is, so I guess you're familiar with that already, so I'll be quick. But essentially the idea is that there is a greenhouse effect. What is a greenhouse effect? Well, it's just a greenhouse. If you want to grow vegetables or fruit during the winter, what you do is you set up a greenhouse. So the sun will come on the greenhouse, it will hit the greenhouse, and then this heat will not leave, okay? It's not like open plan, it's a greenhouse. The planet works a little bit like that. So what is happening is that we get the heat from the sun, and we keep some of that. And that's the good news, because otherwise the temperature would be negative and we could not live here as human beings. We need a temperature, average temperature between 13 degrees, 15 degrees overall on the planet. And that's good. So we need to keep some of that. But the problem is that we are emitting so-called greenhouse gas effect. The first one being the carbon dioxide. And we're doing that since the Industrial Revolution because that is the way we developed. That's the way we improve our living conditions. Everything around you here, more or less, maybe not the floor, everything else is based on carbon. So the whole civilization we've been building is built on carbon. So we're responsible for that. That is the first figure you'll see in the IPCC report. So if you take the last IPCC report, the IPCC report number 6, that is the first figure they did. They simulated between what is happening without human beings and with human beings. And the difference is carbon. The more we develop, the more we emit, okay? Which is, by the way, one of the reasons why I ask you to leave your phone and leave your computer. And I'm sure not everyone did. I think you're being addicted to those things, and so am I, to some extent. And you need to think that everything you're using, most of the time there is carbon being involved. So if you just look at the figure, it's quite impressive, I think, because if you look at the very end, on the right-hand side, you'll see that there is, at some point, we managed to drop. You know why? That was the COVID. So the only reason why we've been decreasing at some point was because of a pandemic. And as soon as the pandemic stopped, we started consuming again, traveling again, and using more and more greenhouse. And that stuff is going to kill us. The main reason is the sort of energy that we're using. You know about that, I guess, already, okay? Coal is terrible. That's the first one we used during the Industrial Revolution. Then we moved to oil, then we moved to gas, and now we're moving to renewable energy. But the challenge for the next 100 century, or less, hopefully less, is to shift all this to renewable energy. And that's not what we've been doing so far, okay? So far, what we've done is, because of that, because of all this carbon, we managed to multiply the population by 3, and we managed to have a much better life. Much, much better life. So more energy means a better life. But we're totally addicted to fossil fuels. For food, if you want to plant some crop, you need to deforest. So if you deforest, you are going to kill so-called carbon sinks. The more people there are, the more food you need. Because of the red meat as well. So red meat is a big, big issue. Why? Because the cows are emitting methane, which is even worse than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. For production and consumption, the more you consume, the more being produced, the more being exported everywhere, the more carbon is being emitted. For transportation, so you know about that already, I guess. I mean, everywhere in the world, governments are trying to shift vehicles to electric vehicles. That is a reason. And that's a big, big, big issue. If you have a chance not to take a plane but take a train, well, is really useful. And for housing as well. So one big issue we're having around the planet, I would argue at the moment, is renovation of housing. And we don't really know how to handle that, but that is super important because right now the energy that is being consumed by the heating of the houses, most of the time is not electrified. So it's either coal or oil or gas, but it's not electrified. So bottom line is, if you take France, and France is not that bad because we have nuclear power. I'm not going to argue for nuclear power, okay? I'm just saying that it's not a renewable energy, but it is a decarbonized one. And because of that, the average is around 10 to 12 tons a year. No, 10 to 12 a year, we should be at 2 tons, okay? 2 tons. We should only be at 2 tons. So that is nevertheless a big issue. And if you look at the way things could change, transportation is a big issue, building is a big issue, and food is a big issue as well. Some people would say, well, you know, it's not about France. France is such a small country, that's not what is happening at the moment. And they would say it's about China, because China is emitting the more. And then it is the US. So we're not responsible for that situation. Well, that's not that simple, because if you look at the emission overall, yes, I mean, the largest countries are the one emitting the more. But if you look at the per capita, that's not exactly the case. China is just starting to emit a little bit more than Europe. And as I'll develop later on, China is very well advanced on renewable energies. So depending on how you see things, the responsibilities are not the same, and overall the bottom line is that we are all responsible for that situation. Also, another perspective to look at is the historical one, which is the one that you'll find at the COP negotiations. So the loss and damage mechanism that been set up some time ago now is this idea that developed countries will pay for developing countries, and every year they will pay $100 billion because they're responsible for the situation right now. That is the US, that is Europe, and then you have the developing countries, but they are not the first to be responsible. Also, one issue, and that I should be talking to you, is about inequalities. The richer you are, the more you emit. And the fact is, so I don't know whether you're rich or not, but I do know that because you're in this room, at some point you'll be rich. You'll be richer than the average population, no doubt. If you look globally, you need to think that 50% of the population is emitting less than 1% of the richest, and you'll be among those 1%. Looking at France, it's a little bit different, but nevertheless, there are huge differences. So the choices you make as individuals will have, just as individuals, will have a bigger impact on climate change than the choices made by most people. The bottom line is we're responsible for what is happening, essentially since the Industrial Revolution, but we're all responsible since the Industrial Revolution. We know that innovation so far, and innovation is changing, but the way we've been teaching innovation in business school or engineering schools used to be, well, you take non-renewable resources and that's where you build innovation, and that's not sustainable anymore. There are current efforts that are being made, but they lead to probably around 2.7, 2.5 degree increase, which will be making your life very tough. So we need to speed up on those issues. Actually, what we should be doing is to achieve net zero, the so-called net zero by 2050. So what is net zero? The idea is we'll keep emitting some carbon because we cannot make a living as human beings without that, but we are going to develop also the carbon sinks. And because we'll have carbon sinks, we can find a net zero between what we manage to absorb and what we are emitting. So we need to reduce the emission, and we need to expand the way we absorb the carbon. Still, the idea is to try to reach 2 degrees. I mean, if we can do that, that would be absolutely great. And even in this situation, just think about the coral reefs, for instance. At 2 degrees, there won't be any coral reefs anymore. They'll be gone. Nevertheless, I mean, it's going to be really, really tough, but still, the planet will be inhabitable. So any action you take, any one mean you manage to avoid, any as soon as possible you act, any choice you make that will have an impact. And don't enter into that, okay? There is this approach saying, well, you know, the government is not taking enough action. That's not me as an individual. You're in a company, you say, well, consumers don't want that, so I'm not going to change. And sometimes it's just to say, well, it's about other countries. So it's China, it's India, I'm not responsible for that. That doesn't work. That just doesn't work. There are plenty of ways to operate. The first one are individual choices. I mean, whether you eat red meat or you don't, that has an impact. Whether you have an electric car or you don't, that has an impact. Whether you fly a lot or you don't, that has an impact. Whether you're using renewable energies or not, that has an impact. So there are plenty of ways to change. But really, the reason why I want to talk to you and the reason why it's so important that we train you on those issues is because it's also a collective problem. It is about political decisions. It is about decisions from companies. So I don't know what the future will be for you. I don't know whether you go, some of you will go in politics. I mean, we do have some ministers and so on who graduated from ESSEC. Most of you, I would assume, will go in companies. Based on that, you'll have a huge impact on what is going to happen. If you think about the company now, okay, so think about what you can do as individuals, but also think about what you can do as managers and head of companies. The first issue, and please do not forget that, is about adaptation. Why? Because regardless of what you are going to do about mitigation, the companies where you are going to work will operate in a different world. It will not be the same world as the one we live in today. So you need to make sure that they adapt. And the reason is financial risk. So I'm not going to detail everything, but really focus on the financial risk. The first one is a physical risk. The physical risk is, well, what I just showed you about this summer, okay? You are going to experiment a world where there will be an increasing number of catastrophes. Catastrophe will cost money to insurance companies. And at some point, insurance company will say, we're not insuring you anymore. So if you look at California at the moment, which is I think, the wealthiest state in the US, the main insurance company for housing just said 6 months ago that they are not insuring houses in California anymore. So they renounced to this activity to say that's too risky. Because every single year now, we have wildfire in California. Used to be the case already. I mean, they had wildfire before, but not every single year. I mean, once it's every single year, that means that as an insurer, it's not a risk anymore. It's a certainty. You know you are going to lose billions every single year. At some point, you just give up. You say, well, that's not for me anymore. So if you're a company and you cannot manage to insure your assets, you have to pay for the catastrophe. Companies do adapt. So that's what Kering, which is a luxury company, does at the moment. So that's just one case. What they did here, they look at cotton. One of the issues when you're a luxury company is that you need very good quality cotton. And because of climate change, that's increasingly hard to find. So what they've done is they look at all the furniture, all the providers within the supply chain, and based on that, they are going to diversify the sort of suppliers they'll get, just to make sure that even if some zone in the world is being impacted, they'll find another way around. Then comes the second kind of risk, which is harder to understand. It's a very finance thing, okay? It's called the transition risk. Transition risk being conceptualized by Mark Carney, who used to be the governor of the Bank of England. And what he said in 2015 is just saying that if you don't have the physical risk, which are related to the increase of climate change, then you're facing a so-called transition risk that relate to the Paris Agreement. Essentially, the message is, if you have assets that do not match the Paris Agreement, at some point, they will be so-called stranded assets. What does that mean? That means that they have no value. Why? Because innovation will come. So the more you look at innovation right now, the more it is about reducing carbon. And the more it is about changing carbon-intensive products by carbon-not-intensive products, carbon-free products. It will be about regulation. Increasingly, regulators will say, well, you can't do that anymore. That's not possible. It is emitting too much. It's too dangerous for us. It will be about reputation. It will be about market. It will be about consumers, essentially. So for that reason, just look at your assets and ask yourself as a company or a bank, what is your risk? And when you start asking those kind of questions, the answer is scaring. So if you look at the banks, that's what you have. If you look at the banks and you look at the amount of fossil assets that they have, and you compare that to the equity, just this ratio, okay, you find out that most of the major banks will go bankrupt. And that is a huge issue for central banks at the moment. So there are debates all around the planet about central bank trying to know what is the level of exposure to transition risk of the banks, because most of the time the banks just don't know. And when they do know, they find out that it is extremely high. So that's where we are. And it's also the reason why the banks are very willing to finance green innovation, because they need to reduce this ratio. No matter what you'll do, companies will have to pay for emissions. So that is the situation right now in the world. Either you have a carbon tax, or you have a carbon market, or you have both. There are countries, like most European countries, where you have both, okay? So everywhere in the world, all the developing countries are, all the developed countries are setting up those kind of markets. They want to make sure that you'll be paying for carbon. What does that mean? That means that when you do innovation, some of the time you'll be putting a price, an internal price into your company on carbon, just to make sure that the innovation will work with a carbon price, okay? So for instance, a lot of companies will say, okay, well, when you have an innovation, you need to set up a price of $100 for every ton of CO2. And then let's see whether it works or it doesn't, whether your innovation is making money or doesn't make money. So you need to anticipate that. I mean, you're a generation, you'll be entering the job market very soon now. You need to anticipate that. You need to anticipate the way you can help companies to adapt to this environment. The second aspect is to mitigate. The second aspect is, okay, on the one hand, how do I operate within this environment? On the other hand, how do I make sure that I can improve the situation, or at least make sure that the situation doesn't get worse? Because, as I told you, when you look at small companies, they don't know what to do. They have absolutely no idea what to do. They know they should be doing something, but they are helpless. And what they expect from you, actually, is that you'll demand them to do something, because actually when we're talking to HR people, they all tell us, we know your students will demand that we do something, but they also expect from you that you come up with solutions, that you come up with ideas, because they don't exactly know how to handle that. And the pressure will increase. So if you look at the European Union, just European Union, that's what we had over the summer. Over the summer, there is a new regulation. You'll learn about that in accounting. That is very heavy on extra financial reporting, on every aspect, environmental, social, governance. You have to report on multiple dimensions. So that will change the way reporting, accounting will be done. And already it is changing finance as well, because finance people used to think it was a small risk. Because of Mark Carney, because of everything they learned about the physical risk and the transition risk, they want to know about that. So they want to know what are the data you can provide on extra financial aspect before investing within your company. You might say, well, that's Europe. No, beyond that. During this summer, almost at the same period of time, the IFRS, so IFRS stands for the International Standard in Accounting. They had a specific body called ISSB, standing for International Sustainability Standard Board. And they set up two standards that will be mandatory over the world. S1 stands for Corporate Social Responsibility, S2 stands for Climate Change. So every country will have to make sure that companies will report on climate change. And it goes beyond that. The European approach is a very legalistic one. If you look at the US, it's about investment. So they have this huge investment plan called the Inflation Reduction Act. And if you really look at the Inflation Reduction Act, it's not about inflation. It is about greening the economy. So there are trillions of dollars that will be invested in greening the economy, having more innovation. If you look at China, if you look at the last 5-year plan, it's a lot about the greening of the economy. If you look at the way China has been positioning itself on renewable energy, it is number one. So it is number one on solar panel. It is about to become number one on wind turbine. It will be probably number one on hydrogen as well. So every big country from an economic perspective, okay, is moving in the same direction. Everyone knows that there are multiple ways to engage with that, but no matter where you operate, those countries will ask you to do something for the environment. So what can you do? Well, here is a sort of a roadmap, a really short one, because I don't want to spend too much time with this presentation. You do just one day of introducing you to those issues. The first one is to cut. To cut. I mean, you can reduce, but that comes after the first one. The first one is to cut. So everything you can cut, you cut. Things that you can change, because, you know, instead of using the plane, you'll be using the train. You cut on plane. If you can work from home, you make sure that people stay at home. Why? Because you be using less carbon. If you can cut on the heat in the building, cut on the heat in the building. If you can manage to have your phone for a little bit longer, that would be great. I'm not sure we all need to change phone every 6 months, okay? And that also a way to cut. If you can cut on red meat, that's also something great to be done. So there's multiple things that you can cut, including in a company. In a company, the question is, where am I making money with emitting less carbon? What is the equation between profit on the one hand and carbon emission on the other hand? And how do you manage that? 2 examples. You might argue they are extreme examples. I agree with that. That's why I'm showing them. But I think they are interesting. The first one is a beauty company called Mustela. One of the things they do, like many beauty companies, is they are providing cleaning wipes. and that's actually 20% of the turnover. That not a small business for them. Okay, 20%. They decided they would stop. Why? Because it's a unique product. You use it one time and then you waste it. It is very bad for the environment. It will be prohibited at some point, but they decided they would stop before prohibition. And they will move to other products. So what I think is great here is on the one hand, you try to have a better business for the environment. On the other hand, you rethink your business model. Okay, what am I going to produce next? Because I cannot produce that anymore. And before I have to stop, I anticipate the legislation and I change. Another case is Camif, which is a furnishing company. What they do is they stop selling on Black Friday. They shut down the website on Black Friday, just as a signal to say, well, maybe we don't need to consume that much. Then you can reduce. And it's a very, so I don't know whether, I would assume there are engineers among you, because most of the time, people entering the ESSEC program, not as a first year, there are several engineers. It is very much about engineers. It is about how you improve efficiency. That's really about improving efficiency, renovation and so on, data optimization. There's plenty of things to be done. But the message here is first eliminate, then reduce, okay? Do not start by thinking, okay, I'm going to do the same, but I'm going to reduce a little bit. That's not the way it works. First, you should think about what can I eliminate, then what can I reduce. Move to renewable energies, which, by the way, is a great opportunity if you want to create companies, okay? A lot of people think about producing renewable energy. That's not enough. We have a huge issue on batteries, multiple type of batteries. Number of innovations are happening at the moment in batteries, but still there are innovation being needed. And also the grid. Because the more it goes, the more, the old system used to be, you produce oil in, I don't know, Saudi Arabia, and then you take a boat and you bring the oil where it will be consumed. That is not going to happen anymore. The place where the production will take place and the place where the consumption will take place will be quite close. But you need to adjust the grid. So there are huge opportunities to create new businesses on grids, on batteries, and of course on the production of renewable energies as well. Another way to innovate is to compensate. Compensate is about what I told you about the negative emissions. Negative emission can be done through forest, but also that can be carbon capture. There's a lot of innovation around carbon capture at the moment. And multiple startups are developing at the moment. Either it is in BECCS or in biochar. I'm not going to detail all the technologies, but there are a lot of different technologies involved here. And then you need to think about transition as also new way to think across the value chain. So if you had some training in strategy, for instance, the way you are going to engage with furnishers is just about the price most of the time. That's not the case anymore. The more it goes, the more companies are trying to work with the supply chain in order to make sure that everything will reduce the carbon footprint, which is good for the environment, but it's all good for the company itself. Which means that there's a lot of innovation to be done. So those are just a few companies that have been set up over the last years. Some of them been set up by ESSEC alumni. That's why we mentioned them. And I mean, there are so many opportunities right now to develop things on climate change to improve the situation. It's just amazing. So it's a great opportunity for you. Okay, so that's essentially what I wanted to tell you. Okay, we're responsible for climate change. Ideally, we should stay under 2 degrees, otherwise it will be very tough. Even with 2 degrees, it will be very tough. Every part of a degree will count. We need to be net zero. So if you look at any serious company at the moment, they want to be net zero by 2050. But that is really tough. And they expect you to come up with ideas and solutions regarding that. That means reducing individual emission, but that's not going to be enough. It means also reducing collective emissions, which means collective decision, political decision, of course, but also think about the companies, okay? So I'm talking to you as company people. And so there's a lot of things to be done to reduce what is happening, but most likely that means also think about the business model, the core strategic business model, because that's what you'll need to change.